Welcome, everyone, to Baker and Taylor's Storytime Palooza, our week-long virtual storytime events where we're highlighting authors from the Summer Reading Prize program that we offer. Whether you're joining us from home or from your local public library, we are just so happy that you're here to listen along with us. I'm Grace Larachelle, the Children's and Teen Specialist here in the East, and I'm a former children's librarian myself. As part of our yearly prize book program where we offer discounted titles for giveaway books in libraries, we also offer these live author events throughout the month of June. Our guest reader today is Ævar Benediktsson, author of Stranded, a mostly true story from Iceland from Barefoot Books. Based on a true story, Ævar recounts the time his grandfather got stranded with a friend on Surtsey, a brand new volcanic island in Iceland. Most everything in the story Ævar tells us is true, maybe for one thing or another, but there definitely was a volcano, and yes, it erupted, and I won't say anything else as it's such an adventurous story, and we know you're going to love it. So now, without any further ado, Ævar, the Baker and Taylor Storytime Palooza floor is all yours. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to hear your story time.
Thank you. I'm very excited also. Just before I start reading, I just wanted to tell everybody a little bit about myself. My name is Ævar. I'm an author and actor from Iceland. Here in Iceland, I've written more than 30 books for children and young adults. I really like stories and I really love writing. And I've also written some plays and radio plays and TV series. So I love stories. I have a young son called Hjörtur. I have an old cat named Elvis. So everything is good here in Iceland. I also have a vast library of books, as you can see behind me, because I really love books. And Stranded, my first book in English, was published last year by Barefoot Books. And Anne Wilson, the fantastically smart and talented Anne Wilson, did the illustrations, which you will see soon enough. Before I begin reading, I wrote this down so I wouldn't mess this up. Before I begin reading, I wanted to give a special shout out to librarians in the US, because I know you had a tough time over the last few years, and I wanted to assure you that bookworms and all kinds of book-loving animals all around the world, we are thinking about you, we are with you, and we are rooting for you. And I found two quotes about libraries that I wanted to read before we begin. The first one is from an author, a horrible author called Lemony Snicket. He writes horrible books. And he said, "A library is like an island in the middle of a vast sea of ignorance, particularly if the library is very tall and the surrounding area has been flooded." So yeah. And the other one is from Neil Gaiman. "Google can bring you back 100,000 answers. A librarian can bring you back the right one." So yeah, I thought those two were pretty nice. But Stranded, let's start. So, Stranded, a mostly true story from Iceland. Everything in this story is true, except for one little thing, and see if you can spot it. I will tell you what it is at the end. This is a story about my grandfather, how he got stranded on a volcanic island, was almost turned into barbecue, and found the most important moment in the world. His name, like mine, was Ævar. It's a name that sounds a little bit like Ivan and a lot like I wear, which is fitting because we both wear glasses, but today I'm wearing contacts. Our story is set in the year 1964, which by my estimation was at least 1,000 years ago. My calculations could be off. Before my grandfather became my grandfather, he was an explorer, a scientist, and a photographer in Iceland. For those who have never been, Iceland is a small and beautiful island in the middle of nowhere, right between the Greenland Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. The summers are cool. We had snow last week, like 3 days ago. The summers are cool, the winters are freezing, and everything in between is, let's be honest, pretty cold and wet, but I still love it. It's a land of fairies and magic, northern lights and volcanoes. Our language is one of the oldest languages that is still spoken today. We love stories of mythical creatures like trolls and elves. The story I like most is the one about the wishing moment. It says that there is one moment of every day that is filled with magic. And if you can find that single, tiny, short, and magical moment and make a wish right then, the wish will come true. One morning, my grandfather woke up, he turned on the radio and heard the greatest news he had ever heard. That is, until he heard that I was writing this book, of course. A volcanic eruption, but it got better. It's huge, and even better, it's underwater. So a brand new island is forming right next to Iceland. For most people, this news was met with the following thought. Oh, how interesting. I will observe this new development from a safe distance, because as everybody knows, volcanoes are very dangerous. For my grandfather, however, this news meant only one thing. I must go there. A few months passed. The island was now a proper island and not an extremely hot heap of molten lava. It had been named Surtsey, after a fire giant from Norse mythology named Surtur. My grandfather and his friend had received special permission from the government to visit it. The volcano was still active, but they promised to be careful. To get to the island, they, hitched a ride with a local fisherman, like you do, who promised to pick them back up the next day. It was summer, the sun was shining, and my grandfather and his friend were excited. They were both interested in nature, they both had their cameras, and they were both certain this would be a trip to remember. They waved goodbye to the fishermen and started to explore. It was amazing. It was a brand new island, still growing, slowly filling with life. My grandfather had on his best purple boots, and since he didn't want to ruin them, he had a very strict rule for walking around Surtsey. If the bottom of your boots started melting, you probably should be standing somewhere else, which is, when I think about it, a good rule for life in general, not just when you're visiting an island that is more or less an active volcano. My grandfather and his friends walked around snapping photos, and day turned into night. It got pretty cold, but they kept moving, keeping themselves warm by climbing and exploring. They were so excited that they didn't sleep a wink. They just kept on taking pictures. Finally, night turned back into day. As the morning sun greeted them, they were so tired that they couldn't possibly take any more pictures. The two friends started walking back to shore. The fisherman would surely be coming shortly, except that he didn't. My grandfather and his friend waited and waited and waited. Finally, they knew for certain the fisherman wasn't coming. And now, dear reader/listener, I know what you are thinking. Boom, I found it. This is the one thing in the book that isn't true. Surely, the fisherman was waiting for them at the shore and brought them right back home to safety. Nope. My grandfather and his friend realized they would have to stay another night on the island. But they had 4 problems. Number 1, they didn't have any water, only 2 bottles of juice. Number 2, the only food they had left was a single orange and some chocolate. A very strange menu. Number 3, their coats weren't very warm and it was getting cold. Number 4, the volcano was still active. Number 4 should probably have been at the top of the list. So this is how they solved those problems. Number 1, they drank the juice. Number 2, they ate the orange and the chocolate. And number 3 and 4, they decided to sleep next to the volcano. Yes, You heard that right, next to the volcano. Now, I know you are thinking again, this is the one thing in the book that is not true. I found it. Never mind the thing about the fisherman. Nope. This is also true. It happened. Even though it was summer, it was freezing cold at night. And an active volcano is the perfect thing to keep you warm at night. Right? It really isn't. Now, my grandfather and his friend walked as close to the running lava as they dared. The ground was very rocky, and for a moment my grandfather closed his eyes and wished he had brought his bed with him. Maybe he would get lucky and stumble upon the magic wishing moment. He opened his eyes, looked around, no such luck. When they didn't dare walk closer, they decided to set up camp. They had to be careful, though, as the volcano was spitting up molten lava as high as the clouds. Their plan was simple. They found themselves a comfy spot on the rocky ground and decided to use their coats as pillows. Then they decided that they would take turns sleeping and watching the lava, just in case the lava in the air and the running lava on the ground got too close and turned them into human barbecue. But then they both fell asleep. Maybe this wasn't the best plan. The morning after, they both awoke. Luckily, no one had been barbecued. The ground around them was very warm, and when my grandfather went into his coat pocket to fetch his glasses, he couldn't find them. All he could find were 2 pieces of glass and a twisted string of plastic. It took him a moment to realize his glasses had melted in the night. And yes, I know what you are thinking. Now, this is the thing in the book that is not true. No, nope, this is true. It really happened. Cold, thirsty, and hungry, my grandfather and his friend walked around the small island all day, waiting for the fisherman who never came. The following night, even more freezing and starving than the night before, they ventured closer to the active volcano. They lay together on their backs and watched the lava dancing in the night sky like some fire-red northern lights. My grandfather closed his eyes and wished he still had his glasses. Maybe this time he would get lucky and stumble upon the magic-filled moment of the day. He opened his eyes and looked around. No such luck. He didn't mind, though. The sky was beautiful, even though it was a little blurry. Now, the following morning, my grandfather and his friend woke up exhausted. They had now been alone on the island for more than 48 hours, with hardly any food or water. Just to do something, they set their sights on a big hill in the middle of the island. Maybe they could call for help from the top. Maybe somebody on the mainland would be looking at the island with binoculars and notice them. When they were halfway up the hill, my grandfather turned to his friend and joked, "I wish that when we reach the top, we would be greeted with something to eat. Maybe some nice hot soup." And he closed his eyes for the 3rd time since they arrived on this strange and beautiful island and repeated the wish, shouting it as loud as you can shout something in your mind. My grandfather opened his eyes and looked around. No such luck. The friends laughed and kept on walking. But then a truly wondrous thing happened. The moment they reached the top of the hill, they spotted a man walking up the other side. "Well, there you are," shouted the man happily as he reached the top. "I heard there might be some castaways stranded on the island. I'm glad I found you." My grandfather and his friend couldn't believe their eyes, especially when this mystery man reached into his backpack and pulled out a giant thermos. "You want some soup?" My grandfather and his friend looked at each other, then back at the stranger. Then they started smiling. "I guess I found it," thought my grandfather. It turned out that this mystery man was from the United States. He had come to the island earlier that morning by helicopter, along with some scientists, to explore. They had landed on the other side of the island, so my grandfather and friend hadn't heard them. Some will say this was a lucky coincidence. I say that my grandfather finally found the magic wishing moment. And yes. Know what you're thinking? No, come on, this has to be the thing in the book. That's not true. It just has to be. But no, this is also true. In the end, my grandfather and his friend arrived safely back to mainland. They never found out why the fisherman didn't come back for them. Maybe he simply forgot. My grandfather didn't care. He was just happy he was back home, and so was my grandmother. And that is the story of how my grandfather got stranded on a volcanic island, almost turned into barbecue, and found the most important moment in the world. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. The one thing in this extraordinary story that is not true, my grandfather's best boots, they weren't purple. They were green. Everything else in the story is true. So this is the end of the story, but there we have a little bit about Iceland and volcanoes at the back. And as you can see now, here is a lot of information, but there are 3 pictures in the corner, photographs that he took during this trip. So you can see them there in the corner. And if you want to know more about volcanoes in Iceland and why we have so many, you can find the book in your library and take a look here in the back. But if you turn to the last page, I want to read a little bit about this. Here's a little tidbit about Iceland and one extra funny story. And now, and while I read this, you can start thinking. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat, and I will do my very best to answer them. Okay. Did you know Norwegian sailors, also known as Vikings, first came to Iceland over 1,000 years ago? The official language of Iceland, Icelandic, it's almost the same language as the Vikings spoke when they first arrived. We can look at 1,000-year-old texts and we can understand a lot of it. It's pretty cool. And when we're in school, we get some of the text. A lot of the words we don't understand, but some of them, it's pretty cool. Many people in Iceland are named after their relatives, like I'm named after my grandfather. Here in Iceland, we even have a special naming committee that approves and denies names that have never been used before. And it almost every year, somebody gets really furious about a name that wasn't allowed, and it's national news. It's very bad. And fourth one, in the summer months, the sun in Iceland remains visible 24 hours a day. It's the Atlantic midnight sun, and that is what's going on now. You have to have like 3 sets of curtains. The sun doesn't shine in and you can sleep. And finally, the legend of Surtsey tomatoes. Around the time my grandfather went exploring on Surtsey, there were strict rules for visitors because scientists wanted to observe how life developed on the island naturally. The visitors had to dust their boots off to make sure they weren't carrying seeds to the island, and they would leave no trace of their visit. There were no toilets, so the visitors just had to hold it in. There is a legend that a local Icelander took a boat over to Surtsey one day just to, have a look around. He must have had tomatoes for breakfast before he came, and he must not have been able to hold it, because soon after, they found tomatoes growing on Surtsey for the first time. And if you read the last line, it says, "How do you think the tomatoes grew on Surtsey?" I'll leave that to you guys. And at the end, the last page, we have the gods of Norse mythology, because the names from the Norse mythology, we use them for our children. And my middle name is Thor, like the guy with the hammer. So we have some great names: Thor, Freya, Loki. I don't know if you heard about him. Odin. So yeah. And the book ends with the question, what wish would you make if you were lucky enough to find the magic wishing moment? So think about that. All right, we have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to do my best. All right. Have you ever been as close to a volcano as your grandpa? No, unfortunately not. I would be really interested to come close to a volcano. We've had several eruptions here in Iceland for the last few years, and some of them were even called tourist volcanoes because you could almost walk right up to them. And some people even brought hot dogs with them and just fried the hot dogs on the very hot lava. The lava had started to. It wasn't like running lava, but it was like really hot, even though it was a few days old. There is an active volcanic eruption in Grindavik in Iceland right now. So if you go on YouTube after we finished and you can type in Iceland volcano live stream, you can just see the whole thing. It's going on right now, and it's going everywhere. So that's quite a spectacular sight. But I have visited Surtsey. I got a special permission because a few years back I was doing TV shows in Iceland about science, and one of the things I got to do was to visit Surtsey. I got a special permission, and I had to take a toothbrush and go over all the zippers and everything on my jackets and under my boots because I couldn't bring anything with me to the island that wasn't there already. But they had a toilet there. That's the difference between 1964 and 2024. They have a toilet there now, so that's good news. Oh, there's a link live from Iceland.is. Another question, have I had a real wishing moment? I tried, but sometimes, like when you're driving and you wish, oh, you accidentally find it. You're driving and you think, oh, I wish the light will turn green, and then it turns green, and you think, oh no, I found the moment and I wasted it on the green light. But I got my wish. So yeah, maybe something like that. Any more questions? If not, that's a-okay. But also, I just wanted to, while we're waiting for more questions, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to read for you guys. It's really cool. And yeah. And like I said before, I love libraries, and some of my core memories from when I was younger is just walking around the library, discovering books I didn't even know existed. So yeah, I love me some libraries. Yeah. Any more questions? No?
If not, thank you so much, Ivar, for reading Stranded with us and sharing that story. I absolutely love that book, and I think it's so fantastic that you turned it into such a fun, adventure-filled children's book for everyone to learn more about your grandfather's story, but also about Iceland.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you all viewers for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again this week as we have several other story times this week. But we just want to say a big thank you to Ævar Benediktsson for sharing that and answering questions. We'd also like to say a big thank you to Barefoot Books, of course. And we will put a link in the chat with our other story times this week if you'd like to join us for that as part of our prize book program. Thank you all, and happy reading from all of us on the Children's and Teen Department here at Baker and Taylor. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. Bye-bye.